The geopolitics of the world basically upended by innovation, technology, and American know-how.
From fracking to windmills to solar panels to coal-fired power, the U.S. is on track to become energy independent. That is huge for a superpower that has been dependent on foreign energy. So the burning question, what is the impact on America's environment and economy? Hello, I'm Greta Van Susteren, and welcome to Plugged In. Wherever in the world you are watching this or listening, you need some sort of energy source, battery, electricity, oil, or gas. And today, we examine energy's future and how it is being shaped in a very dynamic world. You're going to hear from U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry and his predecessor, Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz. All of the above is the latest way to describe America's energy policy. That is because it is some of this and a little bit of that. In the year 2017, the U.S. produced more natural gas than any other form of energy, and this is thanks mostly to innovative but controversial ways of extracting oil and natural gas through hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking. Those techniques are under fire from many environmentalists, and they've also put the United States in a position, though, to be the world's largest oil producer by the end of the year. Two stark changes in U.S. energy from 20 years ago. Coal production dropped about 40% since 1997, while production of renewable energy jumped more than 300%. Coal and renewable energy are part of the political battle lines that will define America's energy future. And we have two reports for you. One on President Donald Trump's plans to roll back regulations on coal, and a report on California's new requirement for solar panels on new homes. Here's VOA's Mike O'Sullivan.
California is forging ahead with solar power. 40% of solar installations in the United States are already in the state, where public utilities are promoting solar panels.
Over 250,000 of our customers, residents and businesses, already have solar installed at their properties. And we're increasing that number by 4,000 to 5,000 new connections a month.
The new mandate will make solar power nearly universal, just as clean energy sources are becoming cheaper.
We are finding wind and solar in particular are frequently the least cost, not just equal, but the least cost options. Arizona just did a bid, a tender, and solar came in at under 2 cents per kilowatt hour. The next closest competitor was dirty, air-polluting coal at over twice that price.
Critics complain that the solar power mandate will push up construction costs by nearly $10,000 for the average home. It's worth it for homeowners, says a solar power expert.
If they don't have to do it, they can save a little bit in the short term in construction, but it's penny wise and pound foolish, certainly from a societal point of view.
SIDA says solar power produces no polluting emissions, and that homeowners will be able to recoup their investment through greater energy savings. State officials have promised to cut 1990 emission levels 40% by the year 2030. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
You can do a lot of things to those solar panels, but you know what you can't hurt? Coal. You can do whatever you want to coal.
Trump's plan abandons the previous administration's goal of scaling back U.S. reliance on coal and reducing the nation's carbon emissions by a third by the year 2030. Instead, Trump says coal-producing states like West Virginia should be able to set their own limits on greenhouse gas emissions from coal-fired power plants. Environmental activists have denounced the proposals, saying it sends the wrong message to the world.
Cars and power plants together are responsible for the majority of carbon pollution from this country. And so for the administration to roll back all these climate protections at once sends a real signal to the world that America is not going to do its part to reduce climate pollution.
The Environmental Protection Agency acknowledges the increased pollution from the rule change could lead to 1,400 more premature deaths each year by 2030. But coal producers insist the fossil fuel is necessary for the nation's energy security.
I think what you have are critics outside of this industry that are a little bit unrealistic in their goals about a renewable economy built on wind power, wishes, and unicorns.
If approved, Trump's proposal could keep coal plants operating longer by not forcing companies to upgrade pollution controls. Coal miners support the president's plan.
I like everything he's done. He's sticking with his campaign promises.
But experts are skeptical Trump's proposal can actually save coal jobs in the long term.
Natural gas is cheaper, renewable costs are going down. So even though they are kind of rolling back some of the regulations that have been tougher on the coal industry, I think the coal industry is still facing some pretty significant headwinds.
The administration's proposals to roll back anti-pollution standards are in line with Trump's decision to withdraw from the 2015 Paris Agreement. Now, every country in the world except the U.S. and Syria are signatories of the agreement, which aims to mitigate the effects of global warming. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
President Trump has been promoting something called clean coal, which critics call misleading. No one is physically cleaning the coal. Instead, clean coal is being used to describe a process that captures carbon dioxide emitted from smokestacks and buries the CO2 underground. That technology is still relatively new, but U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry told me it is this kind of American know-how that could be a game changer around the world.
Say, for instance, CCU, the clean coal, the utilization, carbon capture utilization technology that we're developing at some of our national labs and the private sector working together. That innovation being sold and implemented in a country like China, they're going to create their energy. They're going to use coal. And for the benefit of the environment, seeing them use our technology that we know works. We got a plant down in Houston, Texas that's taking 95+% of the carbon out of the emissions. We're utilizing it as a secondary way to enhance oil recovery, but you can either sequester it or use it in this secondary way. So having that type of technology go to China and India, a big use of good technology for the environment.
When you talk about China, China's got obviously a pollution problem. They want the LNG, and I read that China wanted to pay or contribute to the pipeline, the natural gas pipeline in Alaska, but in exchange they also, if they're going to pay 75%, they want 75% of the LNG. You see China sort of moving into the United States and buying energy. Is that a good thing for the United States if they buy part of the infrastructure?
They've been doing that for a long time. This isn't a new phenomenon.
But is that good?
Listen, I happen to think that it is wise for us to have relations with as many people around the world as we can. We're not always going to agree with them 100%, but I do think it's wise for us to have conversations. Do we need to have oversight and make sure that they're not coming in and taking over major operating portions of pipelines or oil fields or what have you? Absolutely. But is it in the United States' best interest for China to have investments in the United States? Yes, just as I think it's in America's best interest to be able to go in and have investments in China.
I've been in Sudan and in South Sudan, I've seen the influence of China in the oil fields there. Is that good for the United States?
Listen,
or is it good for Sudan and South Sudan?
They're a competitor. My position on this is we're not saying you have to buy everything from the United States, but we're also saying don't have a sole source. Nord Stream's a great example of it, the Russian gas coming into Germany. We're not for that because we don't want Russia to put the European theater into a position of not being able to have options on where they buy their LNG. We don't say we're the only ones. We're for the gas coming in from over in the Caspian Sea up through Italy, supplying the southern part of Europe. But whether you're in Africa, whether you're in Europe, the United States today is a competitor that can sell our LNG anywhere in the world competitively priced, and we just don't want that market to be blocked by China, by Russia, or anyone else.
What about batteries? You know, that seems to be a big area of innovation, or at least a need for innovation, because if you want to capture solar energy, you can't do it in the middle of the night, for instance. Yeah. Where are we in sort of changing batteries and improving storage?
The Department of Energy and our national labs are elbow deep in that.
Are we elbow deep in success or elbow deep in research?
We're having some very good successes, I will suggest to you. So we're not where we need to be yet. I tell people that is kind of the holy grail of energy production, is once we have the ability to store this energy that we can get from various and sundry ways, whether it's wind energy, whether it's solar energy, whether it's hydro, whether it's pumping it up in the daytime and letting it, and I'm talking about the hydro side of it. All of those are potential battery storage sources that can really change the way that we're doing business.
I assume other nations are trying to get to that race to comes up with the best battery, or no?
Sure. Listen, competition is what makes the world go round.
But so I'm curious, I mean, are we close to that? Because as you say, it's the holy grail. I mean, are we talking a year away from something really innovative, or 2 years, 10 years?
I don't think I feel comfortable giving you a date certain that we're going to have battery storage, but I do think that let me switch gears on you just a minute and talk about fusion.
Nuclear fusion.
I'm incredibly excited about the concept of nuclear fusion, what we're seeing in the United States at a couple different places.
Which we've been trying to do for years, for decades.
And you know what, none of this is going to be easy, and it's, but our national labs and the private sector, I might say. There's a company out in Irvine, California, TAE, that is doing some fascinating work on a prototype for fusion energy that, again,
close? Are we close?
By 2025, 2027, they're going to have a prototype ready. So in the grand scheme of things, I say that's pretty close.
Is nuclear fission, nuclear power plants, the United States doesn't seem to be very aggressive there. France, for instance, gets a lot of its energy from nuclear power plants. What is sort of the policy or the Trump administration program as to nuclear power?
The president is very pro-nuclear energy. What form is that going to be in? Again, I'm going to point to
fusion. Everyone's for. I mean, I think a lot of people are for.
Yeah, but in the classical fission energy side of things, small modular reactors. Bill Gates is working with the department. We just announced something here within the last few days of the Department of Energy and Gates with one of his projects to be able to work together. There's another company out there, NuScale, that's working on some small modular reactors. I happen to think, in a personal way, and I think in an administration position as well, that these small modular reactors, there's some great potential for them, and they're U.S. technology again that has the ability to lead the world.
What's the relationship between, like, Department of Energy, energy policy, and, for instance, national security?
They are inextricably intertwined. When you think about 15 years ago, Greta, the United States was told we'd found all the oil and gas. Matter of fact, in the entire world, we'd found all the fossil fuels. We'd produced all of them. This was the decline curve, and there wasn't anything you could do about it. Even if you were able to find new reserves somewhere, the cost to produce them would be exorbitant. Well, innovation, and some of that innovation coming out of our national labs, I might add. Hydraulic fracturing, which was a private sector innovation, working with some of our universities. The ability to keep the polycrystalline on the drilling bits, that was a national lab innovation. Those two together changed the world. Hydraulic fracturing, directional drilling, and today the United States, that 15 years ago was relying upon other countries who might not have had our best interest in mind for our energy resources. Today we're selling American LNG to 30 different countries on 5 continents. The geopolitics of the world basically upended by innovation, technology, and American know-how.
America's world-leading innovation system also gives Secretary Perry's predecessor reason to believe the U.S. is well-positioned for the future. Ernest Moniz was Secretary of Energy under President Barack Obama. He explained to me how America's increased production of natural gas is an energy pathway to a cleaner environment and stronger economy.
So natural gas does burn cleanly with regard to pollution, but very importantly, it emits the least amount of carbon dioxide of any fossil fuel. And if you look at the United States, largely on the basis of market dynamics, we have lowered our greenhouse gas emissions substantially over the last decade, mainly because natural gas has proved more economical than coal. So displacing coal has lowered our CO2 emissions, which of course is very important in terms of addressing global warming.
Okay, it's important in addressing global warming, but nonetheless, it does. There is CO2, there is carbon dioxide emitted from it. So it's not perfect by any means. You agree?
Yeah, it's often called a bridge. So today, as it displaces coal, it lowers CO2 emissions. But eventually, if we need to have, and we will need to have, very low carbon emissions, then natural gas itself will emit too much CO2.
All right, how long is it a bridge into you think that we'll have other forms of energy that won't be emitting carbon dioxide?
Well, now that's a big argument. How long is the bridge? What we've seen is I think most people have been quite surprised at the enormous price reductions of wind and solar, which emit no CO2, together with major cost reductions in things like batteries, so that you can smooth out the production of wind and solar. So those are coming down very fast. They are growing very fast, but still quite small. So to give you a number, in the American economy now, gas is providing roughly 35% of our electricity. Wind and solar combined are between 8 and 9%. So they are growing more rapidly, but they're still quite small. And so I'm not going to say whether it's 10, 20, 30 years, but certainly gas will continue to play an important role, in my view, in our energy system.
All right, when you talk about bridge to like solar or to wind, you're speaking about the fact that we may not, if you don't have any sun for a number of days, you've got a problem in terms of energy storage, and you talk about batteries.
Right.
What is the status of batteries? Because if we had great storage, that may sort of shorten that bridge.
Correct. Now, and that's happening. The cost of batteries have come down by a factor of 2, let's say in the last 7, 8 years, and I expect another factor of 2. However, this is very important, and we see many states now requiring storage there to be able to shift when solar supplies the market. But typically these shifts are measured in hours. We have to be prepared for an energy system to have times when the sun doesn't shine for a long time or the wind doesn't blow for a long time. So that's why I believe, this is another reason why I believe something like gas will play an important role, because in effect any fuel like natural gas is a way of storing energy, but you're not subject to the issue of only a few hours with batteries. So batteries are going to improve, the storage times will improve, but economically I believe for the longer term storage, days, weeks, we will need something like natural gas as a complement to renewable. Now, the United States has played an important role, a growing role over these last years now in beginning to export LNG, as has Australia, Qatar, a big exporter. So the LNG global market is developing. Very importantly, the United States coming into the market and Australia coming into the market, etc., has really begun for the first time to create what looks like a global market in natural gas, as opposed to very long-term contracts signed between supplier and user. So it's a whole different ballgame, and it's another story. But let's just say I think the United States entry into the LNG market, and we will be building up substantially over the next two years. It is also good for energy security, especially of our allies in Europe, for example. They have been very dependent upon natural gas from Russia. They still are, but there are now many more opportunities for sourcing natural gas, and so it's good for the environment right now, and it's good for energy security. It's certainly good for our economy.
It's interesting. I mean, when I was in college, everyone had great hope for solar energy, and solar energy has come a long way since then. But it's not. It doesn't look like it's going to solve the entire energy problem in the United States. At least, not going to provide all the needs for consumption. But you've got wind, you've got water. I guess is it the best that people can hope for as we get greater command of those, learning how to harness those and store them, that we'll see less of a need for the bridge for the natural gas, for instance, or even the coal.
Well, it could shorten the bridge, if you like, with natural gas. But what I want to emphasize is, look, I think, by the way, I've been like you. I've been very bullish on solar energy for a long time, and I think renewables more broadly are certainly going to continue to take a bigger and bigger market share, and that's great. But I've been called an all of the above person. I believe that addressing the very low carbon challenge, which is absolutely central, and I believe we the world, we are going there. How fast is the issue? But in going there, I believe we need to provide all the possible tools to get there, because different countries and different regions of our country have different resources, have different public attitudes. They will have a different mix of technologies to reach low carbon. So in addition to renewables, we already talked about nuclear, we need to look at capturing carbon dioxide after it is released from combustion, say of natural gas or coal, and develop the technology for either utilizing that CO2 in a large way in products.
Any ideas?
Oh, there's lots of ideas. Nothing is out there yet. There's ideas from including it in building materials, for example, all the way to, shall we say, holy grail ideas of take carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water and produce a liquid fuel from it. I mean, it's done in the laboratory, but it cannot be done yet, at least, at scale and at cost.
Energy is national security. In terms of the current administration versus the last administration, are we on par? Are we just as secure? When we look at energy as a national security issue, are we more secure, or can't even quantify it that way?
I think America's energy security is in a very, very good place, and has been for years. We are the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world, not to mention having tremendous renewable resources, and very importantly, having, I would still argue, the world's leading innovation system.
Fossil fuels still dominate the way Americans consume energy. In 2017, petroleum, natural gas, and coal account for 80% of U.S. energy consumption. That is the same percentage as in 1997. That's 20 years ago. So what will the next 20 years look like? Joining us to analyze is Nick Loris, a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and David Livingston, Deputy Director for Climate and Advanced Energy at the Atlantic Council. Gentlemen, welcome both of you. So it seemed like neither Secretary of Energies wanted to go too far out on the line and predict the future, but I'm still going to ask. So I'm going to ask you, Dave, what's next 20 years?
Prognostication is a difficult endeavor, Greta, but I'll say there are a few things that seem to be pretty clear about the next 20 years. Number one, we're going to be using more energy globally. The United States, we're going to probably be fairly flat, but globally we're going to use more energy. Secondly, we're going to use more electricity. Electricity will become more of a platform. We're going to see transport, for example, start to move and merge into electricity as we get more electric vehicles, alternative fueled vehicles on the road. Third, we're going to need more flexibility from our grid as we have a more diverse panoply of resources that we need to orchestrate in a coherent way to minimize costs for consumers. So that means that we have to accommodate large baseload sources of energy like nuclear plants or natural gas plants, at the same time that we're accommodating increasing amounts of small, distributed, renewable generation resources like solar panels on roofs, for example.
Nick?
Yeah, natural gas looks like it's here to stay, but you have so many diverse energy resources contributing to meeting not just America's energy needs, but the world's energy needs. And that's how it should be. It shouldn't be presented as a problem, but really an opportunity, because we spend more than $3 trillion globally on energy, transportation fuels, electricity, every single year. So there's room for everyone to play here.
Why should, if you're watching this show on the African continent right now, why should you care about the U.S. policy on energy?
Because it's really about access and choice. And the more that we supply, that's more access and choice to our friends and allies around the world. And when you have more than 1.4 billion people without access to affordable, reliable energy, the more innovation that we can have on all fronts, natural gas, the renewables, nuclear, that's going to help grow standards of living around the world and raise people out of poverty levels.
But if I could just say, it's not just that you should care about U.S. production policy, right, when it comes to energy. You should also care about U.S. innovation policy. I mean, you know, if you look at, like Secretary Perry was talking about, the battery research that's being done in national labs and public-private consortiums right now.
To me, the battery seems like almost everything. If you can store renewables, then we can get rid of the other issues in a perfect world. But he also talks about clean coal. But is that realistic? I mean, are we just in the innovative period of time? You've got recapturing CO2, which is what Secretary Moniz talked about. I mean, are those realistic?
Clean coal, or what's more accurately, I think, described as carbon capture and utilization, or carbon capture and storage technologies for coal. I'm not ruling them out. I think that there's great research being done, and there's an exciting new tax credit actually here in the United States put through Congress in a bipartisan manner to support carbon capture research. The onus is on coal, though. The onus is on the energy industry to prove that that it will work at scale and at cost, as Secretary Moniz said.
Secretary Perry talked about the Holy Grail being the battery. That's where my attention is. You know, what are your thoughts on that? Are we anywhere near doing the type of storage that we're going to need?
I do. I think anywhere near could be decades at the same time, though. But again, this gets back to getting the regulations right to allow battery technologies to compete in markets that are highly regulated now and are catered to this baseload electricity, where you have more decentralization happening, when you have more access to choice, you can see a lot of potential for solar and battery storage integrating into the market, and we have more microgrid opportunities. Texas is a perfect example where electricity rates have soared down, and it's, again, room for everybody. That it's not just natural gas there, it's not just coal. You're seeing a penetration of renewables at really exciting rates.
We only have a few seconds left. China is obviously using a lot of coal, and they've got an environmental crisis there. So, I mean, not that the whole world doesn't.
They're using a lot of coal. They're also developing, you know, solar, nuclear energy, for example, at a scale and at a pace that we just, you know, we have not witnessed here in the United States. They're going to need all of the above more than any other country we can think of.
It seems like the two cabinet secretaries were actually quite optimistic about all the innovation of what there is out there and how much things will change. So things. I mean, at least it seems like we're on the right path. We've consumed an awful lot of energy, and we have a lot of consumption that we still continue to. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you.
Before we go, an update on a story we've been closely following. In December, 2 Reuters journalists were jailed in Myanmar for the reporting on mass graves of Rohingya. Just 2 days ago, 32-year-old Wa Lone and 28-year-old Jaw So U were found guilty of possessing state secrets. Each was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The journalists investigating a mass killing of Rohingya villagers say they were invited by a Myanmar police officer to a restaurant. At the restaurant, they were then handed some papers by the police, and after leaving the restaurant, the journalists were then suddenly arrested. During the 8-month trial, a police captain testified that he witnessed a plan to entrap the journalists by planting those documents on them. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, called the verdict a terrible stain on the Burmese government. The UN, the EU, Canada, and Australia, among other countries, joined press freedom advocates calling for the journalist's release. Lawyers for Wa Lone and Jaw So U say they are exploring all legal options in Myanmar. And Reuters editor-in-chief Stephen Adler says the news organization will decide whether to seek relief in an international forum. That's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice America. You can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta. And follow me on Twitter at Greta. Thank you for being plugged in.